Good evening, everyone. We'll begin the meeting. Just to let members know, depending how we get on, we'll have a short break around 7:15, 7:30. Thank you. Do we have any apologies for absences?
None received, Chair.
Any urgent business? Any declarations of interest? No. Do we have any public questions?
None received, Chair.
Thank you. Minutes of previous meetings, is everyone in agreement? Agreed. Thank you. Which takes us on to item number 6, Bottomfield Farm, Medlock Road, Failsworth. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. This is, as you see, it's a site in Woodhouses. It's an existing developed site. So as you look at the picture there, it's showing you that in the southern part of the area, separated from the main urban development site, is a former farm complex of buildings. More recently, they've been used for equestrian and other non-agricultural purposes. As a result, we regard the site as being primarily previously developed land. The site at the moment, though, is in the green belt, but as the members will obviously have noted from the report, places for everyone as it's worked its way forward as sought to reallocate the site as a residential development site, and you'll see that the process, the procedure on that has moved so far forward now that that is an important material consideration. So this is just the red edge of the site. This is an interesting one just simply because the blue edge is the land which is also within the control of the applicant, and that's particularly significant in terms of environmental improvements, landscape improvements, biodiversity improvements, which would be conditional if permission was granted to be undertaken. So although the actual site itself has little in the way of ecological biodiversity value, the surrounding area, which can be conditional for improvements, is also relevant. So just to give you an impression of the actual entrance to the site, so on the left hand side there you can see the main farm building itself, the main farmhouse, and this is the entrance that comes into the site itself. On the left hand side, it's not quite shown on that picture, there's a sign that points to the fact that there's a public footpath that runs through the site. At the moment, access to that is along the same roadway that leads into the farm site, but as you'll see shortly, it is proposed to make improvements to that element. The picture on the right hand side, that shows you the view from the existing residential properties that face out across the site, and obviously as you can see there's an established hedge in that position. There's no proposals to actually remove that hedge. I think there's been some work possibly done to that recently following a bit of concern from residents about its condition. This is showing you the alterations to the access, and this is showing two things. The first is that there'll be a change in the priority. So at the moment, the roadway comes into the site, Medlock Road, and then it turns, does a left, which is obviously going off to the right of that picture as the highway. That's proposed to be changed so that this will become priority into the site itself, with then a T-junction, so that roadway then will be blocked off, not blocked off, sorry, obviously it'll have stop lines at that point. These are proposals that have been assessed by the highways officer. Obviously this is work that would actually be in the adopted highway, so obviously would need a separate agreement, but the principle of the scheme has been looked at and has been considered to be acceptable. The kind of brown line that you can see running down, that's the proposed diversion of the footpath. So it's not particularly different from where it is at the moment, so it would have previously followed the access road in, but obviously allows for improvements to that, and obviously allows for improvements to pedestrian safety as you come into the site. And there's a proposal, you probably can't make it out on the drawing, for a new small section of footway, so as you come off that and you emerge onto the road at the moment, you would actually have a safer area to come through. These are views of the right of way that actually then continues out of the site. So the first view is actually coming the initial bit off Hartshead Crescent, and then it turns around the site. So it's following roughly that area, that route still. The next few views is just showing the existing site from the external vantage point. So there's differences in levels within there, and also variety of buildings that actually occupy the site themselves. As you could say, more the kind of formerly agricultural traditional buildings. These are showing again external boundaries of the site, and one element certainly that's within the PFE that we're looking to try to get control over is in relation to establishing the boundaries to the site. So at the moment these are fairly open, but the proposals include full boundary treatments, which where the adjoining gardens will be obviously 2.4 metre high fences, lower fences at the entrance to the site, but that's where it adjoins the access road in. So there's an ability there to prevent further intrusion into the greenbelt. These are showing you existing neighbouring development of the site. So this wasn't in the greenbelt, but it's a similar type of development. But as you can see, there's a physical separation across the field from that site. So this is a proposed layout. Again, as you can see, it's a cul-de-sac arrangement, a mix of 27 properties, primarily 4-bedroomed properties with a small number of 3-bedroom and 5-bedroom units within there. Highways officers looked at the internal layout. We've had a number of changes carried out to that in order to create an improvement to the arrangements and to ensure that the roadway is suitable, for instance, for refuse vehicles and so on for turning. All this is obviously confined within the built area. At the moment, the main buildings on the site, this is one large building with some smaller buildings, so there is a change in that overall spread of buildings across the site. So these are much more widely spread. In terms of overall footprint, there's not therefore a massive change, but obviously the character of the site has changed. But nevertheless, we've looked at improvements to the types of properties on the site, and as I say, some changes to the layout arrangement. These are the properties themselves. A number of them include obviously the standard 2 stories, but with rooms within the roof space. Again, another reflection of that with on the ones on the left hand side, obviously the room there in the roof space just with roof lights. Similar type of arrangement, and then finally small number of properties which again have a mix of single and 2-storey on the site. And again, just a street scene showing how they would relate to one another. So this was, as I say, relating the comparison. So as you can see, well, if you can make it out, the bulk of the existing built development is in the centre of the site, but it covers quite a large footprint. So what we did ask the applicant to do, and they come back with some visions, which again it might be difficult to actually see. What these are effectively are showing you is what you could see at the moment and what you would see in terms of the built development that's proposed. And it has to be said that in a number of instances it's bulkier, if you like. So in terms of the height of the buildings and the spread across the site, there is an increase in that, so they kind of impact on openness from that. But again, as you'll see, the distances you see many of these from, although it is larger, is it materially larger? That's the question that we've obviously been looking at in dealing with the application. So again, a number of different views. These are just following round in a circle of the site. This is a view you would see, so it's Pike Avenue, which is one of the little cul-de-sacs which is nearby. At the moment, there's a clearly open view of the site. So therefore there is a proposal for some landscaping in between there as well. So as I mentioned before, the blue edge, which is the landscaped area, the biological improvement area on the site. So this is a drawing which basically shows that. Now there is a condition, this application has been in for a little while as we worked our way through it. So there may need to be updates to that. So there are conditions that require this to be updated, but nevertheless it gives you the principle of what's actually being proposed around the area. So there's things like hedgerow improvements, new hedge planting and so forth around the site. Now, as I say, in policy terms, site is currently within the green belt, but PFE is now at such a stage where the proposed allocation is now considered to be an important material consideration. And as you can see there, that gives you roughly the boundary of the site itself. And if your memory works well, you can go back to the scheme I've just shown you, and you'll see that it's effectively the same area of the site that's included within there. These are just the criteria. So there are a number of criteria that we were looking at to say, well, even within PFE, does it meet these standards? One element on there is mix of housing and house types across the site. As with many and all of these schemes effectively these days, we've looked at viability across the site, and the applicant has submitted a viability appraisal. So we've looked at, for instance, can we get affordable housing on the site? That appraisal is obviously then independently assessed, and as a result of that we've agreed with the applicant that they will make a financial contribution towards affordable housing of £300,000. So in determining this application today, obviously there wouldn't be an approval, it would have to be a resolution to grant subject to that agreement. But what we're also aware of, we're obviously in a housing market at the moment which is, should we say, a little bit up and down, and therefore the development process, the time of this development coming out, the potential profits could change over that period of time, and therefore as a result we would look to an updated appraisal being submitted at that time. If that indicates that the site value has been higher than has been assessed previously, then there would be a need for a further contribution. So obviously we're covering that element within the scheme itself. I won't go through the criteria in detail, they're all set out there in the report. A number of them relate to highway issues, landscaping, ecology. There's one about potential future mining, which again you'll see the justification for why that's not relevant to this site. So in conclusion, effectively it's a development on a site which is the moment's in the green belt. Had that still been the case, there is an argument, it would be a balanced judgment as to whether the development satisfied green belt policy in terms of effect on openness, whether it had a greater impact. But in terms of the PFE, in terms of the additional evidence that we've had produced in terms of the viability appraisal, your officers consider that this is a suitable development. It would make practical use of the site, it will introduce new housing in an area where there is demand for new housing, and therefore is recommending that permission is granted subject to the Section 106 agreement as set out in the report. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for the officer thus far? Garth, yeah.
Thank you, Chair. Now, my concern, I suppose, with this is that we're considering it on a policy that we think is very nearly ready to go. But, you know, since I've been a councillor, GMSF was prior to that was talked about, and for regularly we were told, oh yes, this is very nearly going to happen, then things changed, moved on, and so on. So for best part of 10 years we've been talking about saying, oh, this policy is nearly going to happen and we're very nearly there and we're in an advanced stage and stuff, but it's never actually happened. So, you know, like I said, making a decision on something that might happen, and at the moment you're saying, like I said, it's nearly there, says, but nearly's not there. So I suppose one of the things is if we were considering it under its current designation, which is Greenbelt land, would this be an appropriate development? And that's you know, that's the thing I'm sort of a bit worried about at the moment on that.
Yeah, Peter.
So first of all, just to clarify, we're not recommending approval solely because of the PFE allocation. I think under the current local plan, even as Greenbelt, because it's primarily brownfield land, as long as we're satisfied that the impact on the openness of the Greenbelt is being mitigated or is not overly harmful, we're still able to grant permission on a brownfield site in the Greenbelt. But notwithstanding that, to address your points about places for everyone, appreciate what you're saying in terms of it's been going on for 10 years, but I mean, and I've only been here for 2 years of that, but I don't think we've probably ever said, you know, it's been at an advanced stage until now, because it is at an advanced stage at this point in time. The inspectors have issued their initial findings in a letter, and we will be taking a report to Cabinet shortly to ask to consult on modifications to the policies in places for everyone. But crucially, in terms of this allocation, while there are some modifications around, and if you like, tweaks around the actual policy wording, the inspectors have not raised any concern about the idea that this site should be removed from the Greenbelt and allocated for housing. So under national policy, at this stage in the process, when the inspectors have considered it all and not raised concern, we do have to give significant weight to places for everyone. That's what national policy sets out. So yeah, but it's not, but I say our recommendation is not just about places for everyone, it's also about the current policy position.
Thank you. Councillor Hoban.
Thank you, Chair. Just a quick one. The section 106, is that, is that going to be, is there going to be conditions on that so it's used in that vicinity, or is it to be used in different areas? Is it going to be kind of ring fence for wood houses, or does it get used anywhere?
In effect, the aim is that it is used in the local area of the site, but obviously what we look at, in effect, this money goes into a pot. So obviously where there is demand, where the requirement is, the money would be utilised. There's always an aim to try and prioritise in the area of the application site, but we can't say, yes, that's a guarantee that it's going to be spent in this immediate area.
I think just to add to that as well, I mean, obviously our colleagues in the housing team would be supporting us in this and helping us to try and find a way to spend the money in a suitable way. And as Graham said, you know, first priority, we would look in the local area, but it would come down to, you know, what is available, what can actually be achieved with that £300,000. Is there an opportunity in the local area? If not, we'll gradually start looking a bit wider until we find the right solution. But yeah, it's a process to go through in due course, and obviously as local ward members, there'll be opportunities to be involved in that.
Councillor Akhtar.
Just to follow on, in term, obviously the contribution is in the region of £300,000. So could that not be changed into providing affordable property on that particular development rather than making a financial contribution?
Thank you. Peter.
So ideally, that's what we would look at first of all, but the situation with this particular development is obviously the type of houses and the type of units that are being created don't necessarily lend themselves towards an affordable housing offer, and it's trying to strike that balance in terms of if we move away from what's being proposed right now and offer different types of housing to meet that particular need, it then affects other parts of the development. Other things maybe then become less affordable and what have you, or less viable. And so in this situation, it's a very tight and constrained site. It's a relatively small number in terms of housing sites. Obviously, we deal with much larger sites in many other cases. And so in this situation, I think a financial contribution is an easier solution. And as you say, we have then £300,000 to then go and spend on either developing or purchasing properties in the vicinity that can then be converted to affordable housing.
Thank you. Councillor Hintz.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just forgive my ignorance because I'm new to this, but obviously with the affordable housing situation, essentially if the developer's just paying £300,000 so he doesn't have to have affordable housing on his site, is that not just essentially another tax?
Peter?
So, I understand why you're asking that question and how it can appear in that way, but it's not in that sense. I mean, ultimately, as I said in response to the previous question, ideally we would have the affordable housing on site. But when we do the viability appraisal, you know, there's a reason we do that. That these sites, even a site like this in the Greenbelt, has its challenges, and it can't always provide all that we want it to do on site. And so it's not so much a tax, it's a fact of having done the viability appraisal within the assessment and the model, there is a capacity of £300,000 to either be a financial contribution or, as suggested in the previous question, if it could be worked, to enable affordable housing on site. In this situation, that second option didn't quite work, and so we accept a financial contribution in lieu of that to spend in the local area.
Yeah, Councillor Hinds.
Sorry, like I say, it's a learning curve for me. So in essence, a developer can get out of meeting their social housing obligations by simply paying a donation or whatever you want to call it, a tax, so they don't have to have social housing on. Because I'm not naive. I would have thought any development could have a particular type of house on it. I'm confused why you're saying it would be not lend itself to affordable housing. What exactly does that mean?
Yeah, Peter. Yep.
So I think, first of all, let's move away from terminology like tax and that kind of thing, because it's not that. A Section 106 contribution, so any Section 106 agreement, whether it's to provide something on site, to provide something off site, to pay a sum towards something off site, it's all required and necessary to make the development acceptable in planning terms. That's the definition in legislation. And so in this situation we have a policy that requires affordable housing to be provided. That policy says in the first instance we would rather that be done on site, but by exception we can accept a financial sum in lieu of that. So it's not a tax, it's not a kind of a payment to get out of providing what they need to do. They're still providing it because they're giving us the money to provide it. So it's not, if that makes sense, because the money has to be ring-fenced and can only be spent on that. So I hope that clarifies it, but it is all, I appreciate how it might appear in that sense, but it is all part of the policy and how the system works.
Thank you. Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. Right, regarding the places for people release of land, I thought it had actually been agreed, but I was away for a year, so I probably missed something. So as far as that's concerned then, when this finally comes to its conclusion, which I'm pretty certain it's near there was various plots of land that all the authorities in Greater Manchester have released. And we've all agreed to release certain amounts of land. Now, it won't be took into account that this land isn't there anymore and we're not contributing it. It will be took into account that if this goes through, that we have contributed that release of that greenbelt land.
Yeah, it will. I mean, ultimately, the revised plan period for Places for Everyone, if I'm remembering correctly now, I've tested myself, I think it starts in 2023. Obviously, this site, while we're granting, or potentially granting permission, or resolution to grant permission tonight, it won't actually be developed for another year or two or more, you know, in terms of the time scale of how it comes forward. So the housing completions achieved off this site will contribute to what we are setting in policy in Places for Everyone as our housing requirement.
Thank you. I think we don't have any speakers on this agenda item. Would that... We do? No? Yep, Katie. Yep, would the agent like to speak on this? Yep. So
Yes, please, Chair.
Yeah, you'll have 3 minutes and the officer will let you know 30 seconds before your
Okay, the trap door opens then.
Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. My name is Stephen Harris from Emery Planning. I'm the agent for the application. So obviously I don't want to repeat too much of what the officer said and in the officer report, but I'll just pick out a few key points and maybe answer some of the questions that have been raised just in the last few minutes. So first of all, obviously the application's been in for a while, and we've worked proactively with the planning officers and thank them for that over the last year, 18 months in terms of revising the scheme to get to a position where we're recommended for approval. Obviously, I think the first councillor mentioned about, well, would we still recommending approval of this site, notwithstanding PFE? And I think the answer was yes. And that's obviously, whenever we submitted this application, PFE was obviously at a much earlier stage and didn't have the weight that it does now. So obviously, so notwithstanding PFE, obviously the recommendation to approve would still stand. But the draft allocation in PFE just re-emphasises the acceptability of the site coming forward for development. As the councillor last spoke to, Councillor Davis, this is a site that Oldham Council has put forward in PFE for up to 30 dwellings, so we are delivering that level of development on the allocated site. Again, I think Mr. Richards referred to, the inspectors have now endorsed, obviously, the plan to go forward to modifications. So the inspectors have sort of independently considered this allocation, but obviously all the various allocations in PFE and obviously endorsed those to be carried forward. So I think that's why that's been given a substantial weight. So that just only re-emphasises the importance of the acceptability of the principle of development. In terms of the material considerations, again, this house, or this site's providing obviously the 27 houses. It's been identified to meet the housing need in Oldham on a previously developed site. So obviously, yes, we're coming forward now to deliver a site that obviously the council has got in their own plan. With regards to viability and the Section 106 contribution, again, there's a question about, well, can we kind of ring fence the contribution to the local area? So again, we'll obviously have to draft the Section 106 agreement, but obviously we're willing to discuss and agree the wording for that to...
30 seconds.
30 seconds, right, okay, goodness. So yeah, in terms of 106, happy to get the wording agreed with the Office of the Council. Landscape and ecology, significant benefits, not just obviously within the site, but as Mr. Dickman said, on the wider greenfield area, so there's significant landscape and ecological benefits. So I'm probably getting towards the end of 30 seconds. So obviously endorse the recommendation, and obviously if any questions, I'm happy to answer them. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Harris. Does anyone have any questions for the applicant? Councillor Davis.
Thanks, Chair. Regarding the 106 contribution, it was suggested potentially that rather than give a cash contribution, one of the houses could be affordable for affordable housing. I mean, would that be an option?
I don't think it's an option, no, because obviously in terms of the viability assessments looked at everything as a whole in terms of the growing conditions, the sales rates, you know, the other improvements, requirements that we have to meet. So it's not just a choice of we could provide one affordable house or 300,000. The viability assessment concludes that's what the figure, or that's the figure that the site can deliver in terms of 300,000. Again, as Mr. Dickman said, there's a mechanism in there to review that. So we're not just saying, well, we're getting permission when the market's may be low. You know, if the market then picks up at a later date and there's more profit in the development, then that 300,000 figure could increase. But in terms of the question itself, whether personally 300,000 would go much further in delivering affordable housing than one affordable house on the development. So I think, and even with that mechanism to review the viability at a later date, there's potential for more as well. So I think there's an opportunity there to be much more beneficial to people in local need, really, through the contribution. And again, it's something that's always, as a developer, as an agent, you know, being about housing coming forward, these are people in need now, and I think that money could be very well spent, obviously, in delivering affordable housing. So hopefully that answers your question. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions for the applicant? No, thank you. We'll move on and now we'll open it up for discussions. Any questions or comments? Yep, Councillor Gloucester.
Can we just go back to the aerial photograph, please? So we're saying that this site will not contribute to urban sprawl? I know you're saying it's brownfield because there was a farmhouse on it,
Yep, I'll
but
bring
this will not contribute to urban sprawl in terms of greenbelt policy, is that what you're saying?
Graham.
Yeah, I think it's, if we say, look, if you can just imagine the shape of that site and the development you can see on it, then it depends how far up we have to go. It's a pity I can't. So again, you can say obviously slightly different scale of the drawing there, but effectively it's the same area of the site. And what you could see from the aerial is it's actually physically separate from the main established development in the area. So there's just the access road that links through between them. In effect, that will not change. So where you can see in that kind of shape that comes down, where that development site is, that will continue to be the case. So most of the area between the new houses and the existing will obviously be fields. That will continue to be fields, and that area, even with after PFE, remains in the green belt. Does that answer?
Thank you, Councillor Akhtar.
I don't want to labour on about affordable homes, but I think we're trying to put affordable homes into one box. There's different elements of affordable homes, and there's different ways of actually delivering that. It's not about having so many units for affordable homes and you just rent them out. Affordable homes could be for sale as well. And why can't that £300,000 contribution be spread across a number of properties? For example, in the past, the government used to have home buy, where the new home buyers used to get 20% discount on a property, so their deposit is paid, and it makes it easier for people to get a mortgage. So in terms of as a local authority, you want to raise aspirations across the borough, so why can't that be, as an option, be looked at this scheme and other schemes that might come forward in the future?
I think Peter's exhaustively discussed about the contribution and everything, so I think that's discussion for another time then on that matter. So I would okay, Councillor Hinds.
Yeah, sorry to come across as an idiot, but I think is it a contradiction in terms when we use the phrase affordable housing? Because can you define that for me? Because I think all housing is affordable. It's just a question of who it's afforded to, if you get my meaning. So is there an actual definition of what affordable housing means?
Pass this on to Peter.
The answer is yes, there is. It's in the glossary to the National Planning Policy Framework. I won't read it out because it's very long, but there is a definition, and that's what we work to. So I understand what you're saying, because ultimately, I mean, actually, often it's people say it in the other way in terms of what is classed as affordable housing under that definition is not affordable to everyone, and that's true. That is an issue sometimes, but the definition we have to work with in relation to what's in the National Planning Policy Framework is there, and that's when we say affordable housing. That's what we mean.
Any further questions for the officers? No. Right, so the motion is for recommendation. Would anyone? Yep, Councillor Hogan moved it. Did anyone second it? Councillor Davis. Yep. All those in agreement? All those against? Abstentions? The motion passes. Thank you. Next item on the same area regarding the pumping station, I think it is.
Okay, thank you, Chair. This application is obviously a fairly small scale one in terms of the pumping station, but it's obviously relevant and it's before committee simply because it relates to the previous scheme. Had the previous scheme been refused, then effectively the pumping station justification wouldn't exist, so we wouldn't actually have much more to say about it at that point. But in light of that, this is obviously, it's a vital bit of infrastructure that is required for the new development. It is unlike the main housing development in the green belt and will still be in the green belt itself, even after PFE is adopted. However, in terms of the amount of development above ground that comes with it, effectively it's a small kiosk, it's the fence that goes around that kiosk, and it's the access track that serves the site. So it has a very limited development imprint, and again going back to the previous scheme where I spoke about the landscaping improvements on the surrounding area, which includes this area, there will be improved landscaping also as part of this proposal. So that's effectively what's showing you there. So if you just about recall it, the site, the development site is just to the left of where the red line ends. The reason why it's that shape is that there's a requirement for you to show access to the public highway from your development. So effectively the site itself is the small red rectangle at the left hand side. The rest of it is effectively the access that you would use. Now most of that access is already there because it serves a gas main close to the site itself, so there's limited additional development associated with that. So there's the site itself. Just effectively to the kind of top right hand side of that site is where the pumping station site will be. And there you should be able to just about make it out. You can see the kind of dotted blue line, so it's as that emerges to the top right hand side, it's just within that small area. And again that shows it in relation to the development site itself. These are just views, you've already seen these views, so this is more in relation to just showing you the general access to the site. On this area it shows the existing public right of way, so it's where roughly the edges on the right hand side at the moment is roughly the site for the pumping station. So it's not development which would normally be acceptable in the green belt, and therefore you have to demonstrate very special circumstances. In this instance the very special circumstances are the new contribution of housing on the site and the fact that that can be achieved without any significant harm to the openness of the green belt. So obviously there's conditions in relation to landscaping proposed as part of the recommendation, but other than that it's considered this is an appropriate form of development. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Any questions for the officer? No, we'll move on to the applicant if they would like to say anything.
I don't think there's anything else I need to set out, but again, I'm here for any questions if necessary. Thank you.
Any questions for the applicant? No, I'll open up for discussion. Should we move on to the vote then? Would anyone, sorry, not move on to the vote. Anyone like to move? Yep, Councillor Hoban, move the motion. Councillor Fryer, second. All those in favour? Against? Abstentions? Passes. Okay, thank you. Right, next item is Greens Bistro. Thank you.
Okay, just get the presentation sorted. Right, so I thought it wasn't going to pop up then. Yeah, so item number 8 on the agenda is for the site now known as Greens Bistro, which is King George V playing fields just off Wade Row in Upper Mill. So the site, I'll come on to what the application's for in a moment, but the summary is on the screen there. So the site, many of you will know this site, I'm sure, was the former public toilets in Upper Mill at the top end of the park, and planning permission was granted last year in August by the planning committee for the reuse and extension, substantial construction, as you'll see from the photographs in a moment, to use that as a cafe with ancillary takeaway facilities. So this is an aerial view. I appreciate it's not particularly clear on the image there, but in the centre of, well, just off to the left of the centre is the large green area, which is the park, otherwise known as Upper Mill Park, and it's at the northern end of that part where the bistro is now located. So as I said, the planning permission was granted last year for the use and the extensions. That permission has been implemented. The development's been operational since the summer, late June, I believe, is when it opened. And this is an image of the approved plan viewed from the south. And the application before you today is actually for some amendments to the approved plan, which are now retrospective, so they have been carried out, and they relate primarily to a larger flue that's been erected on the roof of the building, the introduction of screening on the roof to screen the flue, or to screen part of the flue at least, and for some very minor amendments to increase the depth of the fascia around the building. So if we just move on to the proposed plan, this shows the development that has been carried out on the site, and just to help provide some perspective to that, the photographs probably tell a better story. So that's a picture as it exists, certainly is about a month ago when that photograph was taken, and you'll see from this image here the flue on the left hand side on the roof of the building. It is black, and the planters that are adjacent to it do offer some screening of it, as well as the effect of the trees along the boundary with Wade Row. And this is an image from Wade Row itself, just showing the top of the flue in the background. And this is perhaps just an earlier picture of the situation as the permission was been implemented and the development was under construction. So, in effect, this is what we call a Section 73 application to amend the condition on the previous planning permission to substitute the approved plan, which would in effect regularise the development that's already been carried out. So that's in short, that's the introduction, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Does anyone have questions for the officer? No? We'll move on to the speaker now. I believe we have Miss Frances Haywood would like to speak on the application. So you'll have 3 minutes and the officer will remind you. Thank you.
Hello. I'm here to object to the amendment, and there's two reasons. One is appearance. When we were given the promise that this was going to be an attractive building set in the park, we were all, it's a conservation area, and we were led to believe it was going to be beautiful. But whatever we've got now, we've been let down a little bit, because although the building itself is nice, the flue has just obliterated any good feelings about the building. It's external. The flue originally was designed to just come up vertically with a cowl. What we've now got, as you'll see by the images, that we've got this horizontal plane of flue. So they've got two bends, and it just does take up a lot of eyesight. You're not looking at a green roof, which was lauded as going to be a perfect solution to being in a park setting. The applicants acknowledged, and by screening it with the artificial, and I say artificial plants, what's happened to a green roof now? We've got these artificial planters around it, which blow over in the wind. You've got a nice picture there, but they're not like that all the time. It's not performing as it should have been, that green roof, at all, and it's been spoilt. The other problem we've got with this is the noise that's generated from the flue. There's actually two problems with the noise. One is the intake fan, which sits in the overhanging roof on Wade Row. It's a constant drone of a noise that the neighbours on that row, they're just having their lifestyle ruined by it. The other problem is the extraction part of it, which sits on top of the roof, which obviously is envisioned. It's creating such a noise that at times when it's on full capacity, when they need it, it draws that much air through. It sounds like an aeroplane engine. It's just ridiculous that you hear this constant noise, and there's no way of you know, reducing it. But yeah, they turn the volume down or the speed of it down, but it's still there. And the other problem is the door of the kitchen's being left open, the servery hatches for the
30 seconds.
external servery, they're open, so you're getting to hear all the kitchen noises, the sound of the fans, and just overall it's a real poor result of what we were expecting from it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions for the objector? No. Thank you. I'll open up the floor for discussion then. Anyone have any comments or questions? Yeah, Councillor Hoban.
The opposer to it, the objector to it, mentions this the volume, the noise. Has that been looked at? I can't find it in the paperwork. Has that been looked into?
In direct answer to your question, yes, it has. Obviously, with something like this, we would consult with our colleagues in environmental health, and as stated in the report, no objections have been raised to this specific application.
So it has been measured as well. The volume that's created.
Speaker on and
So it has been measured, this extra volume that the objector is mentioning, it has been measured and passed by environmental health.
Yes, so just for a little bit of context here, the previous planning permission still stands. So, and that, as you saw in the images, included a flue on the roof of the building. So, in essence, what this application is at least partially for is the revised configuration of that flue and obviously its greater size. The previous permission creates a very substantial fallback. It could still be technically reverted back to that scheme. But for operational reasons, issues that the developers faced with that's why they've carried out this scheme instead. And as I said, we've consulted with our colleagues in environmental health who would, or if they had genuine belief there was such a serious issue that it would cause a noise or other concern, odours as well, for residents, they would have raised issues and object to the application. Obviously, it's slightly... there's different remits from environmental health to planning. So, of course, in the future, if that flue, for instance, isn't maintained in accordance with the manufacturer's specifications and as a result it has vibrations or causes additional noise, or if there's a breach, sorry, if that's the case, they can act on their legislation to serve notices if need be and have that resolved. But coming back to the planning position, there are conditions on the planning permission and also which are duplicated onto the recommendation before you tonight in terms of operational hours as well. So that serves to try and minimise and mitigate any harm that would occur. But it's safe to say, you know, that there will be impacts. We're not saying there's no impacts. It's whether the impacts have in regard to our adopted policies. Policy 9 in this case is acceptable. And in this case, we think it is acceptable and environmental health have not raised any objections.
thank you. Councillor Harkness.
Yes, I just like this. I presume that the applicant decided to do the work and then we found out and then said it was for operational reasons, not whilst they were building realised they needed something bigger and then contacted planning and said, actually, we need something bigger. I presume it was the former rather than the latter.
Yes, when, as you'll know, when we approve planning permission, we have a condition on the majority that will have a list of the approved plans, and then going forward the expectation is the developer carries out the development in accordance with those plans. There has been some deviations, that's factual, from that approved plan, and that's the exact reason you've got this application before you tonight. In terms of the exact reasons, they have been just grouped together and described as operational difficulties, basically, with the bringing the development forward.
Thank you. Any further questions? Councillor Gloucester.
So what happens if we refuse this then? Can you just tell me? Will they have to go back to the original plan? Is that what you're saying?
Martin. Yep.
So if the application's refused, there are different avenues that can happen. Obviously, it would mean that the development on site remains unauthorised, or insofar as the flue, the fascia and the screening is concerned at least. So we would ordinarily then need to consider enforcement action. So that's one possibility. The other possibility is they could, of course, revert back to their original plans, but to date they've told us they're not achievable because of technical issues with the flue. But that's one thing that they could do. Or, of course, appeal the refusal to the planning inspectorate.
Thank you. Councillor Hintz. Yep.
Hi, just a quick one. In terms of the operational impact of the original flue, has that been verified? Because is that the job of planning to verify, or is it because it's just a statement, isn't it?
Martin.
Yes, the main role for us in dealing with the planning application is looking at the impact on amenity, its design and appearance, impact on heritage settings, the conservation area, the historic park, and so on. We've got to give some regard to the fallback position of the smaller flue that's previously been approved. So what we've in essence got to consider is the additional impact from this larger flue of such significance to each of those considerations that would justify refusal, and in our opinion it doesn't, which is why we're recommending approval.
Councillor Holborn, then Councillor Harkness.
So if this would have originally come in front of us with this flue and with all that, would you have recommended it then? Is it it's a difficult one, isn't it? Because it's been recommended for one thing, and then we don't really know the reasoning behind the change, but they've already done it. So if it had come originally like that, would there have been any issues that we need to consider now?
Yeah, Peter.
You're not going to like my answer to this, but it's not relevant. Ultimately, what is before us tonight is the application that's before us tonight, and that's all we can consider. And in a sense of, because we've already granted permission for the bistro with the flue that was on the plans previously, all we are assessing now is this flue substantially worse in that sense? Is it causing any particularly significant additional issues? But to try and answer your question, it's very difficult to do that, isn't it? Because obviously, first of all, it would have been yourselves making that decision as a committee, so I can't say what you would have decided in that situation. But obviously, it's I think the likelihood is it wouldn't have changed our recommendation, because if we had concerns about it now, we'd be raising them with you. So it's unlikely we would have had concerns in the past. But I say it's not actually relevant.
Councillor, quick follow-up.
Thanks. Yeah. It's just that the principle of it of kind of are we leaving ourselves open for unscrupulous people to put a planning application in that then we can amend at a later date, and it's that kind of issue, isn't it, for me?
Yeah, and I totally understand that perspective, and it's one of the challenges of the planning system ultimately, but the reality is when a retroactive application like this is put in, it doesn't matter why someone has broken those rules, it doesn't matter who they are, we have to just consider the application before us in that regard. Thank
you, Peter. Councillor Harkness.
Yeah, I suppose it's a comment really, following on from Councillor Hoban there. So yeah, it's a sensitive conservation area. It's, people are emotive about this area. An application, they went in for operational reasons, put in an application, said what they needed, how big things needed to be, and then went and built something different. And then come back and say, oh, actually, no, we need this now bigger for operational reasons. And it just really irritates me that an applicant in an area a prominent area like that, which is, you know, as the speaker said earlier, you know, some of the stuff earlier they were happy with, and then they've gone and done something completely different, which isn't as acceptable. And it just really annoys me when, you know, an applicant comes in and does something like that in a really sensitive area, because those small changes do have a big impact in a conservation area.
Yeah, Peter.
I mean, just to respond to that, I mean, first of all, it annoys me too. It really does. And it's frustrating that we can't take more action about that. I've said that before in this committee. But we are where we are with the legislation as it is. And I think in terms of the last point you made there, effectively that's the question we're asking you tonight. You know, we've made our recommendation. We don't think that the additional harm created by this flu is significant enough to refuse. But it's you as a committee that obviously have to make that decision ultimately.
Thank you. Councillor Hints.
Yeah, sorry again, it's my first meeting, so I'm on a learning curve. I think there's principles involved here. So I'd just like to ask a question. Did the owners make changes and were found out and reported, or did they make changes and then come to the council? Because I think it's important we know that for the obvious reasons.
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Hints. Peter.
Again, as per Councillor Hobin's question before, I'm not going to answer that because it's not relevant to the decision. To be honest with you, off the top of my head, I don't know because I wasn't directly involved at that stage. But the reality is, it doesn't matter whether they were upfront about it, whether it was reported and found out. We can only consider the application before us. I understand why you might feel otherwise, but I'm just telling you in terms of what planning legislation allows us to do.
I understand your constraints, but certainly for the people who represent the community, I think it's something that should be considered.
Councillor Akhtar.
Thank you, Chair. Obviously, we've got a picture of the flue of what size it is now. Do we have any drawings of what it should have been like in the first place in terms of what we agreed in the previous application? And could we put both of them on the screen? Is it possible to put them together? Right. I'd just like to be awkward, you see.
That's how it was approved, and that's how it is now, in plan form.
Any further questions or comments? Yeah, Councillor Lancaster.
Thank you, Madam Chairman. I'll join the alliance of members of this committee in saying that I don't like retrospective applications as well, and I have complained about them in the past, and I do think it'd be helpful for us to have had more detail about the operational reasons for this amendment. That said, the two screens that were just flicked between in the presentation there, in my mind, don't demonstrate a great deal of change. I think I can't find enough reason for refusal on the basis of those two images that were shown. There's not a great deal of difference, and I do think, to give some credit to the applicant, they clearly have tried to kind of shroud the appearance with those planters as well. So on that basis, and that I don't want to make too much of a fuss about what is a relatively minor change, although acknowledging that we don't like the retrospective nature of applications, I'm happy to move for approval on this, which I know won't be uniformly popular with Saddleworth residents who I represent, but that's not why I'm here. I'm here to judge the application, and on the basis of the application, I'm happy to move the recommendation for approval.
Thank you, Councillor Lancaster, for your brave decision. Anyone second that? Yep, yes. Councillor Ibrahim. All those in favour? All those against? Abstentions? That passes. Thank you very much. Next item is land to the north of Salmon Fields regarding the construction of a community diagnostic centre village. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Right, so this is a site on the north side of Salmon Fields. As people will know, this particular kind of end of Salmon Fields is primarily an industrial area, so there's a number of large industrial premises. The site itself, though, had lain vacant for a number of years. Previously, permission's been granted for a temporary building on the site as a kind of first phase of the diagnostic village. This proposal now involves the completion of that, so the phase 2, the overall development of the site, and of course to make that 5-year initial permission permanent as part of the wider development. So this is the site itself. Salmon Fields down at the bottom, as you can see there, the red edges. Just to the north of where the blue edge is, you've got Turf Lane. As you can see, just to the immediate north of the site, Thomas Street, there are a small number of houses. They are well shielded from the site itself, but the remainder of the site boundaries relate to commercial and industrial premises at the moment. So obviously the aerial is a little bit out of date at the moment because obviously the first phase of development has already taken place. So this is the site itself. The area with the dark shading, that's just showing you the area of the existing building on the site, and then the various coloured shadings show you the various new facilities that would take place within the site. And as you can probably work out, there's various car parking areas within that and landscaping areas around the exterior of the site. So this is Salmon Fields itself, just showing you the view towards the access of the site. This is the existing entranceway, so obviously the access arrangements, they've already been put in place and were designed to take the wider development in the longer term. And this is the existing first phase building of the site. These are just showing you the existing car parking areas. Just the one on the right showing the electric vehicle charging points that have been put in place. These are just a couple of views. Obviously it's currently fenced off for the development site, but much of it's now already been cleared of vegetation. But you can see in the background one of the neighbouring industrial buildings and the scale of that building. This is showing you the boundary to Thomas Street. So at the beginning there I mentioned the small group of houses at the northern end of the site. So as you can see, there's a well established landscape screen between the site and that area. So I'm now just going to the views of the various buildings on site. A mix of scales, primarily single storey but with some 2-storey elements within there. Various facings of the buildings themselves, which are all reflective of the existing structure that's already been put in place. So again, just running through these and obviously serving various features of the diagnostic approach. And back to the landscaping that's proposed around the site itself. Oops. Stay on the landscaping, I think. So in terms of the site, it's part of a business and employment area. So obviously it's subject to policy 14 of the local plan, which requires that if non-employment development takes place on that site, that either a number of factors have taken place on there. One of those factors is if the development can be shown to have a significant community benefit in terms of the outcomes. Now, obviously, there's more detail in the report of the various functions of the buildings on site, but quite clearly there is an established element of community benefit from these. It's part of a wider NHS process to bring these various diagnostic processes together on a single site. Obviously, the current building on the site has operated quite successfully so far. In terms of the landscaping, biodiversity, Again, that's been looked at by GMEU and by the trees officer. They're satisfied that the new planting around the site would be sufficient and would actually create biodiversity gain at the moment compared to the present situation on the site. The highways officer is satisfied with the potential development impact. You'll see from the report there has been a concern expressed by the occupier of a neighbouring business. And try and bring back the aerial. And again in the report you'll see under the section devoted to the highways element, we also consulted with Transport for Greater Manchester about the impacts. These give an estimation of the likely amount of additional traffic would come forward, but also note that the nature of the facility is that those, obviously people turning up for appointments throughout the day, will mean that that will be spread across the various hours of the day, not focused into the morning, the evening peak, where there will be more pressure on the traffic light junctions at the either end of Salmon Fields. So on that basis, the amount of traffic can be estimated hasn't at the moment indicated that there would be a need for an alteration to the phasing of those lights, or that there's any significant changes needed to accommodate the wider development, although obviously it's acknowledged that there are concerns of the existing business. The business also made a second comment, which was a concern about really about the address of the site, which isn't something that the council actually has the control over. But it is noted that the business in question is the one just to the kind of centre left of the site. It has a completely separate entrance to the site. It's 175 metres away from the site. Both premises have signage on the road frontage, although it is appreciated because it's quite a well landscaped area. There's not a lot of long visibility to there, but also the entrance to that site is barriered off, so anybody entering that site will see the signage and so forth. So we're not a concern in terms of needing improvements to the identification of that particular site from there. So as I say, there are no other objections to the development. There's quite clearly a health community benefit from the site, and on that basis considered that the application is acceptable. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Akhtar, yep.
Thank you, Chair. It's not a question to the officer. It's a much needed service in the area across Oldham and actually across the conurbation itself. So therefore I would like to move approval.
I think we've got an applicant. Do you wish to speak on that? Are you happy for us to move straight to the motion?
I was just going to speak very briefly, and I think, so my name is Barney Schofield. I'm a director at the Northern Care Alliance, NHS Foundation Trust, the applicant. I think just to emphasise the points that I've made earlier about the benefit that we've already seen from the first phase of this development. Over 25,000 patients have now had diagnostic tests in the building that's already there on the site. The patient feedback has been extraordinarily high. I think patients find the site preferable to battling our hospital sites when they only need a simple test, and it's allowed us to take weeks and weeks off the time it takes us to diagnose serious illnesses, and in many fewer visits to patients because we deliver multiple tests on the same day in this facility. So this application seeks to add new diagnostic capabilities to this site, so we'll see even more patients. We're confident it's much needed, and thank you for considering the application.
Thank you. Obviously, Councillor Akhtar has indicated he's moved the recommendation. Councillor Davis, all those in favour? Oh, apologies, we jumped the gun again. Any questions for anybody? No. Have you got questions? No. Right. They all want to get on with the vote. Peter, all those in favour? Brill. Thank you. Next item. Thank you very much. Right. South East Rock Street car park. Would members like to take a break? Or are we all right to carry on? Carry on. Yep. Soldier through. Right. Rock Street car park. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So this is an area that, again, I'm sure members all know well, right at the eastern end of the town centre. So there's just giving you the indication of it. So Rock Street, obviously on the south side, the parish church just to the south of the site, the former sports centre site, which obviously is used to some extent by temporary car parking at the present time. There's some existing established trees on there. The majority of those will be retained, but it forms part of a wider element of improved access through to the site, and obviously linking through to the future Jubilee Park within the site itself. So obviously that's just giving you the aerial view. This is the proposal itself. So again, you can see that there's improvements to footpath routes through the site, to cycle routes through the site, which then take you on beyond the junction. The junction improvements themselves, they're not part of this proposal because they're part of the highway scheme. So it's just the actual new open space park area we're dealing with. And you can see in the central area there, there's a new seating area that will be put forward as well. And obviously it opens up views opposite the listed church, and obviously views towards the listed church as well. So as I say, this is a first phase, if you like, of this part of the town centre of the wider proposed improvement works. I don't really feel the need to say anything more. If members have got any questions, recommended for approval. Thank you, Chair.
Councillor Cosgrove has indicated.
It's just a query because residents have asked me, are you going to intend to provide additional disabled bays throughout the town centre? Because there'll be a loss of, I think, about 6.
Yes. Graham?
To be honest with you, I don't have that information, so I can't answer it. Unfortunately,
Right.
the highways officer is
Yeah,
is not
there is a
available.
major concern that the disabled bays in Oldham are at capacity at the moment. So is there something where we can...
Yeah. Thank
So-
you. Yeah, Peter.
So ultimately, I mean, first of all, parking in general, we've had a parking strategy done for the town centre as part of the transport strategy, and we're content that the overall reduction in car parking that will be happen as part of developments across the town centre, including this, can be coped with, specifically in terms of parking bays for those with wheelchairs and what have you, or disabled access. Obviously, while some would be lost here, there are still plenty around the town centre generally in terms of the provision, and obviously it's been the gift of the council who own the car parks to provide more if more is needed. So I think in terms of the loss at this particular site and through this particular application, we're comfortable that, you know, can be accommodated, but if there is a concern more generally about provision of parking bays for the disabled in the town centre, it's something that I think we can pick up outside of the planning world, if you like.
Any further questions or comments? No. Just a comment from me. I think it's a fantastic initiative, part of our wider town centre regeneration plans, and I think it's much needed, especially in built-up areas, to have this open green space available for our local residents, particularly those visiting the town centre. So on that basis, I'm happy to move the recommendations. Yeah, Councillor Harkness, a second. Yeah, all those in favour? That's unanimous. Thank you. Last item is Alexandra Park Depot.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And this application really is just to amend conditions of a previous approval for the redevelopment of the parks site, the depot site. So there's two elements to this. First of all, it's the way the conditions were originally worded that required things like car parking areas and landscaping to be provided at the end of the scheme. Because it's being done in 2 phases, that doesn't quite work. So it's just to amend those conditions, but also in the interim a number of the original conditions have also subsequently been discharged, or additional information has been submitted. So all those condition wordings have all effectively been updated. But the end result, the end scheme will be exactly the same. As I say, it's primarily to do with the car parking you'll see from the report the highways officer has raised no objections to that. That's the site itself, as members will know, just to the south-east corner of the park. These are just showing you the two phases of the site, so this is what it will be like after the first phase. So it's the area on the kind of eastern part of the site, which is the new office block, effectively is going to be built and completed at this stage, and then the final scheme which will be completed afterwards. So as I say, it doesn't change the fundamentals of the site, it's the same development, but just updates and amends some of the conditions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cosgrove, if you've managed to maintain yourself.
It's just, what are the parking bays for the birds? It says birds, didn't it? 15 birds. 15 birds.
Yeah, I think on page 2 on the speakers list you've written 15 birds in brackets. So if you can just clarify that. Yeah. I think
It's condition 15. Yeah, sorry, that's just a brief introduction to tell you what that condition was actually about, rather than obviously write it out in. Next time we're going to write it out in total, yeah. So yeah, there will be. I think, ironically, there are. If you can just about make out on this, the little red dots around the outside of the site are in fact bird boxes.
thank you for that clarification. I'll bring order to this meeting now. Any questions or comments for the officers? Right, we'll move. Would anyone like to move this? Councillor Nadeem, Councillor Cosgrove, Councillor Akhtar. Yep. All those in favour? That's unanimous again. Thank you very much. And the last item is appeals report. If you've got any urgent updates, can you?
Yep. So just I won't keep you long. Don't worry. Obviously, we just provide this as a for you to note about the progress with different appeals that have come in on applications. I wanted to highlight one in particular in the report for you tonight. In terms of the top one, land adjacent to Maltby Court in Lees. This is important simply because it was a proposal for residential development of 40 houses on other protected open land. So it's quite, in terms of the status of this appeal, if you like, quite a high-profile one. Could have led to other decisions going against us if it had been lost. But the appeal was dismissed. So, and the inspector's report was very supportive of the other protected open land policy. So it's a really positive result. And I want to make sure you're aware of that. It gives us some strength as we move forward now that we've got a better house and land supply position to defend applications on other protected open land.
Thank you, and that ends tonight's meeting. Thank you very much.